Today's Bible verse is Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 23. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt in Potiphar. An officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of the house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and all over that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there he had no concern for anything but for the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to the master's wife, "Look with me here. Look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although he spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." Before he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outdoors." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Remember, everyone, God is still speaking.
Amen. You may be seated. It's one of my favorite hymns. Sing it often to myself, at least the chorus part. Because I do need God every hour. All right, that's not my sermon. You ever know somebody that just seems like they got the lucky draw in life? Good looks, smarts, athletic prowess, good personality, everybody likes them. Seems like everything comes their way without them even trying hard. And you know that you have many of the same things, many of the same qualities, many of the same attributes. It seems like they got more. Or at least theirs gets noticed more. You ever know about somebody like that? I know several people like that. And I can't stand them. Always winning, and worse, gracious when they lose. Just nice people, always nice, like nothing gets them down. And why would it? I mean, they got all the good stuff already. So why not be nice all the time? You know anybody like that? People like that get on my last nerve. Find myself sometimes hoping that something bad happens to them. I know it's wrong, Lord, forgive me, but I would not be upset to hear that they got hit by a bus or something. Well, I'm not saying that I want to drive the bus, although, Lord, forgive me. I imagine that's how Joseph's brothers felt about him. He was one of those got-it-all people. Clearly, he was daddy's favorite. Since birth, Jacob doted on Joseph more than he did on any other boys. I mean, he loved them all, but Joseph was special. So special that when he was a teenager, his father Jacob gave him an amazing Technicolor dream coat with long sleeves. All the other brothers got regular short sleeve coats, but Joseph got the fancy one. And he was always so straight and honest, stuck to the rules. Sometimes you might want to take a shortcut. Sometimes you might want to take a break. Sometimes you might want to say, that's good enough, when you know you have the capacity to do more. Joseph wouldn't do that. He did what he was put there to do. If he was told to work 8 hours, Joseph worked all 8 hours. And if he had to miss some, he made it up later. And he did it all to the best of his ability. And he had no problem telling on you if you fell short. That was the problem. And the brothers didn't like that. So Joseph had to go. And that's where we start our story today. Pray with me. Open the eyes of our hearts, Lord. Open the eyes of our hearts. We want to see you. We want to see you. Open the ears of our hearts, Lord. Open the ears of our hearts. We want to hear you. We want to hear you. We want to see you. We want to hear you. Speak, Lord. For we, your people, are listening. Amen. Joseph was a slave. His brothers roughed him up, prepared to kill him. But God was with Joseph. So instead, they ended up throwing him into a hole and selling him to a group of traveling merchants. Now, if I can take a moment in the side here, I just want to point out that these traveling slavers who bought Joseph from his brothers were essentially their cousins. See, the Ishmaelites were descendants of Abraham's other son, Isaac's half-brother. It's the line of Father Abraham we don't really talk about, but maybe we should. Because if you think about it, if the covenant said Abraham's line would be blessed, then wouldn't that include the Ishmaelites too? They're also part of Abraham's line. Maybe we should think about that. Noodle on it some other time. Tradition says that those Ishmaelites are now who we call Muslims. Think about that. The covenant applies to them too. Okay, let's get back to Joseph. Joseph is sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites, and they take him to Egypt to make a profit selling him into slavery. He got purchased by someone pretty high up in the Egyptian government. Joseph's new master was like the head of the Department of Justice High. He ran the security, the police, and the prisons. He bought Joseph as one of his household slaves. Joseph was a slave. I know we don't really like to think about that too much. We're ready to jump into him being a boss, running the stuff for Pharaoh, interpreting dreams and all that. But the truth is, before he got to all of that, Joseph was a slave. And it happened, he was in slavery because of the treachery of his brothers. That had to weigh heavily on Joseph. The story doesn't tell us, but I bet he cried himself to sleep many a night in his captivity. He missed his father. He missed his baby brother Benjamin, his only full-blooded brother. He even missed the traitorous brothers who got him into this situation in the first place. He missed his home. Joseph had to be devastated. But Joseph never lost his faith. And it was that faith that carried him through. The story says that God was with Joseph in his suffering. That means that even in his horrible situation that Joseph found himself, things tended to work in a way to make it better for him. Even in the middle of his pain and suffering, his loneliness, his feelings of betrayal and abandonment, even those moments when he questioned the need for his own existence, God was with him and made it better for him. Joseph found favor with his master. See, even though he was going through all of that emotional trauma, he didn't change who he was. He remembered the things his father taught him. He probably continued to pray to his God, and as much as he could, being a slave and all, kept the practices and traditions of his religion. Even as he moved up in the ranks of slavery, he never abandoned his faith. It was probably the only thing that he had from home. And God blessed him. But here's the thing, because Joseph was a slave, the blessings he had, or the blessings he received, turned out to be more blessings for his master. Yes, as he was able to do the business and prosper, and things grew under his hand, the person that benefited most was his master. Joseph did get a little bit more freedom than some of the other slaves, and the folks who dealt with him from outside of his home probably forgot sometimes that he was a slave. But Joseph knew. And I'm sure there were many things around him to help remind him of who he was and where he stood. Little things that may seem innocent on the surface. Little things people would say. Things that they would do. Things that seem so innocent on the surface. But to the person on the receiving end, they sting. It didn't matter how high he rose. It didn't matter how capable he proved himself to be, no matter how qualified, no matter how likable a person he was, no matter how wide his smile, big his grin, or deep his laughter. When it all came down to it, Joseph was still a slave, and slaves have no agency. That's how the wife was able to take advantage of him. Now, I know we like to throw shade at the wife, and frankly, she deserves it. Although I think it's pretty hypocritical to throw shade at her for this, after all the deeply disturbing stuff all our male heroes in the Bible did to women. Yes, what she did was wrong, but I'm not so sure she initially set out to abuse Joseph. Not at first. I think in some ways she was just lonely. Her husband was probably gone all the time for work, and Joseph was always there, taking care of everything. And it didn't hurt that he was hot. That first time, she probably got caught up in her feelings and without even thinking about it, made a move. It probably surprised her too. I don't know, I'll admit I'm making this all up. But something about this story makes me not want to accept that the wife was just outright selfish and evil. I think she was just human. Joseph was a likable guy, and she was lonely. But Joseph was still the same guy he was when he was free. He still did things the right way, not the easy way. And laying with his boss's wife, his master's wife, was not the right way. So he politely turned her down. And everything would have been fine if it had just ended it there. But she couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe she was evil. Maybe she was bored and this game was fun. I don't know. But what is clear is that she didn't care what happened to Joseph. So she kept trying. And finally she snuck up on Joseph one day and tried to jump him. He fought her off and got away, but in the process left his jacket. That's when the wife started screaming for help. And when help came, she claimed that Joseph tried to assault her, and she used his jacket as evidence. She held on to that jacket until her husband got home and told him the same story. And just like that, Joseph's life went from the frying pan to the fire. It's a shame that the one time a woman is believed, she was actually lying. But everybody believed her. And with most women, as with most women in the Bible, the story doesn't really tell her name. So I'm just going to call her Karen. There is so much that is familiar about this story. This snippet of Joseph's life is really about racism and the dynamics of power, the abuse of power. This story shows us that both racism and the abuse of power are evil. First, Karen used her power. Joseph was just a slave, a valuable slave, but still just a slave, no better than livestock. So if it came down to her word against his, she would almost always win. That's just how things work in the world. Joseph was a slave, and slaves clearly cannot be trusted. And not only was Joseph a slave, but he was a Hebrew. And you know those Hebrews can't be trusted, especially with good, pure Egyptian women. She knew exactly what her hateful words would do. The poison of the disease of racism was too deeply infused in their minds. It was too easy to believe even the most ludicrous assertions. And everybody that knew Joseph would at least question his story. But Potiphar believed her. And he threw Joseph in jail. Some say it was easy jail like the federal country club prisoners and politicians get sent to. But this was still jail. The little bit of agency Joseph had as a slave was taken from him. And once again, he was thrown away like garbage. Can you imagine how Joseph must have felt? Can you imagine how much he suffered? He was just getting his feet back under him, and the trauma was still there, but he was dealing with it. Now it all comes back, and he finds himself in it even deeper. Once again, he is betrayed. Once again, he is falsely accused. Once again, he is alone. I'm sure Joseph cried. I'm sure he lamented. I'm sure he cursed and threw fits and stormed and lost all control of himself in his anguish. But I'm going to bet that he also prayed. He kept his practices. He kept his faith. And even in his agony, he did not change who he was. And once again, God was with him. In a short time, he was running things again. Yes, he was still a slave and now a prisoner, but God was with him. So within those constraints, he had the maximum of freedom allowed. And in that freedom, his work was to the benefit of others. And with each blessing he brought to his masters, his station in life rose. God blessed him. But he was still a slave, and now a prisoner. And though he worked through it, I imagine he still suffered. I read somewhere in my prep for the sermon that Buddha said, life is suffering. I understand what they're trying to say, but I think it's a little off, a little misleading. I think that what it is more like is that there will be suffering in life. See, I think that life is joy. Life was given to us by the Creator and pronounced good. Yes, there is suffering, but the suffering is something that's on top of life, something that's added to life. And so for the work for us is to find life in the midst of our suffering. To find the joy, to find the peace, to find the hope, because it's always there. It may be overshadowed at times by your suffering and by your pain, but if you search deep down, the joy is there. God is always with you. Just like for Joseph, God will always be with you. As long as Joseph stayed faithful to God, as long as he held firm to his principles, as long as he didn't look for shortcuts, as long as he did things the right way, God blessed him. And through him, blessed others. And everyone could see that God was blessing him. God was always with him. And with that, he was able to get through. He was able to continue to live in the midst of his suffering. He lived because God was with him. God was always with him. Friends, I tell you, don't give up your faith. I know you may be going through, but don't worry. God is with you. I know this. I know this for a fact. How do I know? Because I've experienced it. I've lived it. And I think if you look back at your lives, you will see moments where you've lived it too. Moments when you thought all was lost and God showed up. That little ray of sunshine that lights up the darkness surrounding you. And suddenly you can see a brighter day is coming. God is always with you. God promised it. And God keeps God's promises. It's the covenant. And we all know it's all about the covenant. Amen. Amen.